Hello and welcome to another fun-filled geography revision video. Today is going to be a bit different. Rather than me going through pure knowledge, it's going to be in the format of a quiz. And to use this video effectively, on each slide there is going to be a question. For example, on this slide here, it is what are the characteristics of constructive and destructive waves? What you need to do is you need to read the question, maybe with a pen or a piece of paper, or even just saying it out loud. You need to try and answer the question. You then pause the video where I will stop speaking, and a second or two later the video will reveal the answers. So for example, question 1, what are the characteristics of constructive and destructive waves? Pause your video and return for the answer. Well, the answer is that constructive waves have a lower wave height but a longer wave frequency. They build up the beach with deposition from a strong swash, and they also have quite a weak backwash. They're called constructive waves because they build up the beach. In contrast, destructive waves have a much higher wave height. They also have a shorter wave frequency, which you can see by these kind of close together waves on the destructive wave. As they break down and erode the beach, they do that because while they have quite a weak swash, they have a very, very, very strong backwash, which is able to drag that sediment out to sea. Now, this video is super useful because you can go through quite quickly and see some really quite intricate questions, give them a go, and then there's little bits that you can kind of use then, or any topics that you're not sure on, you can then go and revise. Without further ado, let's get cracking with some more of the questions. So, the first set of questions all relate to erosional processes along a coastline. And you can see a cliff system here on this picture. And the questions are as follows. State 2 types of weathering. State 2 types of mass movement. What is the difference between abrasion and attrition? And in which direction does longshore drift occur? Pause the video, attempt the questions, then return for the answers. So, there are actually 3 types of weathering. Mechanical, where water freezes and cracks and breaks a rock apart, which actually causes the rock falls you can see here on this video, with the freeze-thaw weathering. We've got chemical weathering in the form of acid rain, where it reacts with the carbon in the rock and kind of creates a melting effect. And you can also see on here this grass area here, which is called biological weathering, where roots grow into the cracks in the rock, and as they grow, they break those cracks apart. Mass movement is another form of sub-aerial process, a fancy term for a landslide. And we've got rockfall, which we can see here, slumping, and mudflow. Abrasion and attrition are similar, but abrasion is kind of hurling rocks at the base of the cliff, like sandpaper, whereas attrition is those particles rubbing and smashing into each other and breaking themselves down to become a lot smaller. So abrasion breaks. It breaks the bottom of the cliff by throwing hurling rocks at it. This happens a lot with wave-cut platforms. It happens a little bit with cave arch stack stump as well, but that's mainly hydraulic power. And in which direction does longshore drift occur? In the direction of the prevailing wind. So, thinking about coastal landforms, there are 2 main types of coastal landform that are formed by the process of erosion, transportation, and deposition. Pause the video. Can you state 2 examples of erosional landforms on the coast and 2 examples of depositional? So, for erosional, we've got headland, bay, cave arch, stack stump, wave-cut platform. Any of those could be a 4 or even a 6 mark question. And for depositional, we've got beach, sand dune, spit, and bar. Now, when we were looking at these coastlines, we also looked at a case study, the fastest eroding coastline in Europe, also known as the Holderness coastline. And again, using a diagram, we've got 4 questions of really good knowledge that will help you out in this exam. Naming one erosional landform that you can see on that coast, and a bonus if you can tell me how it forms. One depositional landform on the coastline, one hard rock type, and one soft rock type that you can see on that diagram. Pause, answer, then return. Okay, so the main erosional landform we've got is Flamborough Head at this top here. Now, Flamborough Head is an example of a headland, and headlands and bays form on a discordant coastline where there are layers of hard and soft rock. The soft rock erodes faster than the hard rock, leaving this headland sticking out. The other key feature, the depositional landform on here, is Spurn Head, which is a spit at the bottom or the far south of the Holderness coastline, alongside the estuary, which is actually a river landform, isn't it? The bottom there. And again, the whole idea of a spit formation is that longshore drift will occur along a coastline. The coastline will change shape, and the longshore drift will deposit sediment in the form of a spit. When 2 headlands are connected, that will form a bar and leave behind it a lagoon. Looking back at the diagram, we also have our hard rock, the chalk, and we also have our soft rock, the boulder clay. And that's great case study material to add in to your answers if you're trying to distinguish between hard and soft rock. Now, moving on to depositional landforms, we also have a beach which is formed. 4 questions, pause and return. Okay, so hopefully I got those questions. So what type of waves cause deposition to occur? Well, they must be constructive waves. For a beach to occur, we have to have constructive waves. These waves cause deposition because the swash is so much stronger than the backwash, and it pushes material up onto the beach. Now, we tend to find the kind of lightest, finest sand close to the low water mark. And the reason why we end up with these big pieces of shingle at the top is when there is a big storm, it can push the big sediments up, or that swash pushes sediment up the beach. The friction of the sand means it loses energy, drops it, and as it returns back, it lets off a little bit of sediment it can still carry off with it. So the friction slows the wave down, which causes the deposit over here, and sometimes during storms, it can flick over this high energy. And deposition tends to occur in summer because there's less storms. The waves are less intense in summer, so we tend to have lots of deposition. Now, another depositional landform relating to sand dunes and our fieldwork. 4 questions again. Pause the video, have a go, and unpause. So, sand is transported along a beach by saltation, which is where the sand bounces along, and longshore drift. But something stops it and traps this sand. And that could be some driftwood or some litter that prevents that sand from moving down the beach in its normal pattern. Now, it should just blow away, but it doesn't, because vegetation like marram grass protects it from the wind. Its deep roots bind the soil together to create these yellow dunes and grey dunes. And just like our fieldwork, the further away from the sea that you go, the amount of species and the percentage cover of species increase because there's less wind, especially in the dune slack, but also there's less salt in the soil. The pH is better, which allows plants to grow. And on the exam, the other thing they could ask about really is identifying real life pictures of landforms. There are 4 with 4 marks on here. Pause the video, have a go, and unpause. So we have W, a wave cut platform. We have X, which is a beach. We have Y, which is a sand dune. And finally, Z is a cliff that has shown some evidence of some sort of mass movement, potentially rockfall at the bottom of the cliff, isn't there? Maybe a little bit of sliding and mud flow as well. And then finally on coasts, we come to our coastal management. Now remember, in some parts of the coastline, you can do nothing. You can leave the coastline alone. There's no valuable land. But other places, you have to do things. 3 questions this time. Have a go, pause, and unpause. Okay, so hard engineering on here. We've got some groins. Oh dear. Going out into the background. We've got some rip-rap. On the soft engineering side, we've got beach nourishment, afforestation, managed retreat, beach nourishment, sand dune regeneration. And conflicts can occur, especially in the Holderness coastline, about the building of these, because lots of different peoples have lots of different opinions. They're really, really expensive. Some people argue that if you build a groin or a seawall in one place, it can cause increased erosion in other parts of an area. And often the environmentalists don't particularly like them because they don't want the wildlife habitats to be damaged in any way. Moving on to some rivers questions. Now, you can see 3 cross sections of a river. A cross section is, imagine you could cut that river in half and see what it is. 3 letters, which is the upper course, which is the middle course, and which is the lower course. Pause, answer, unpause. So, hopefully we realised the upper course is obviously B. It's got that stereotypical V shape to it, a V-shaped valley. It's got steep valley sides. The river is narrow. The water actually is moving slower here than in other parts of the river because more of it is coming into contact with the land. So the friction increases. But we do, because of gravity, have a vertical erosion. The middle course is C. It's significantly still high, but it's a lot flatter. It's a lot wider. The river is looking a little bit more akin to the lower course, which is A, where it's very, very flat land with floodplains now. Very, very, very wide river. High velocity and lateral erosion. Naming the feature, obviously we've got a waterfall. If you're not sure how a waterfall forms, I can recommend pausing and drawing this diagram. In the same way, this feature here, as I've just mentioned, is a V-shaped valley caused by a combination of vertical erosion, hydraulic action, abrasion, attrition solution, and mass movement of weathering on the rocks on the side of the valley as well. That's what gives it the V-shape, not the gorge. Okay, so moving on to meanders, and you can pause the video and look at the diagrams. We've got a cross section on the left-hand side here, and we've got a basic diagram on the right. The questions are 1, 2, 3, and 4. Pause, answer, unpause. So the fastest current is known as the Thalweg. Deposition occurs on the inside bend because there's slower current, more friction, and therefore less energy. Erosion creates a river cliff, whereas deposition creates a slip-off slope. Moving down to the lower course of the river, we also now have a series of different features. We've got the following. So, some questions again. Look at the diagrams. Write the diagrams out if you'd like. Pause and unpause. So, in this lower course, we've got levees, floodplains, and estuaries. The heaviest material is deposited on the side of the bank as the levee here, where the river has its most energy. And what happens for a levee or floodplain to form? We need a flood. A flood needs to happen, as on that diagram there. And when it comes to floods, in the same way we have rivers, we have to learn how to manage them. And one of the most important case studies is when we looked at the Somerset levels, which are this area prone to flooding. To prevent future flooding on the River Para in Somerset, they've introduced a number of strategies. That's question 1, who's the pictures to help you. We've also got question 2 and question 3. Pause, answer, unpause. So, on the top left, we have the Bridgewater Tidal Barrage, a £128 million project designed to stop flows of rivers. We have dredging, where they remove the sand from the bottom of the river and increase the channel carrying capacity. And trees solve everything. They are also doing afforestation, where they are planting trees on the side of the banks to increase interception of rainwater, reduce surface runoff, but those trees take a long time to grow. Other hard engineering approaches would be dams and reservoirs, embankments, which are like natural levees, and channel straightening. And soft engineering is wrong, because that is for coasts. Soft engineering would be afforestation or land use zoning. So ignore that answer at the bottom there. Soft engineering would be land use zoning, which is basically where you don't build on floodplains, or afforestation, which we just talked about a minute ago. Right, moving on to tectonics. Now for this one, you definitely need a piece of paper, ideally. There's going to be a series of about 10 questions. What I'd like to do is exactly the same as the last part. I'd like you to read the questions, have a go at them. Any questions that you really are unsure on, why don't you Google them? Why don't you use your revision guide or use your flashcards or something to help you get the answer? And then come back, unpause your video, and I will be here to give you the extra bits of answers. This time, there is a series of questions. 10 questions in total. It might take you a little while to do this one, so pause the video please, have a go through those questions. A lot of these are quite likely to come up, and then unpause and I will return. So, number 1, identify the 3 P's used to reduce hazard impact. Well, predict, plan, which is prepare, and protect. An atmospheric, tectonic, and biological hazard would be hurricane, an earthquake, and disease like cholera. Some places have a higher capacity to cope because they've got better protection. Japan has got way more chance of coping with an earthquake than Haiti does, because they've got earthquake-proof buildings. They have the earthquake drills in September. They plan for it. They know what's going to go on. The only plate boundary that doesn't get volcanoes is a conservative plate boundary. And the volcano that forms at a constructive margin is a shield versus a composite at a destructive plate margin. Composite are the ones that go bang. They get all the gas from subduction. Which earthquake case study had a higher magnitude? Well, it was actually Nepal. Nepal's was 7.6, whereas L'Aquila's was 6.3. And that's a really good argument as to why it's not just about wealth. The magnitude of the storm is also massively important. People still live next to volcanoes because of tourism and fertile soils, both of which cause a multiplier effect. People tend to live in earthquake-proof zones either because they can't afford to leave due to poverty, or because nowadays we have such good earthquake-proof buildings like Taipei 101, people can live in Taipei or in Taiwan, and if an earthquake happens, they know there's a good chance they're not going to get hurt or die from it. Secondary effects, which is a bit later on, would include loss of tourism for both parties, landslides in L'Aquila, avalanches killing climbers on Everest in Nepal, amongst others. And a long-term response for L'Aquila was uni fees being removed for a full year. You might have chosen other ones. Quickfire, what process is occurring here? That process is known as subduction. And quickfire number 2, what type of crust is created here? Well, we've got two plates moving apart. The mantle is rising up to create new land in the form of a shield volcano as well. It's under the sea, so it is oceanic crust, which tends to be newer, it's younger, and it's denser as well, because it's been compressed by the sea. Okay, another round of questions. Again, pause the video please, have a go at the questions, and then come back for the answers. Okay, so number 1, Hadley-Ferrell polar cell. The whole point of atmospheric circulation is to move heat from the equator to the poles. It acts like an air conditioning unit. And if we didn't have atmospheric circulation, the equator would be far hotter and the poles would be far colder. And places like the UK and Europe would be far colder. This gives us heat, warm winds from the equator. The minimum ocean temperature is 27 degrees C. Climate change will mean that they occur further north and south. Storms will get more frequent and more intense. Orbital cycles, you might want to look these up, is where the Earth pivots on an angle, and when it's further away from the sun, there's less concentrated sunlight, so it's colder. The ash from volcanoes can block or reflect solar radiation, which actually causes short-term cooling. But on the flip side of that, all the sulfur dioxide and CO2 they release can cause long-term warming. We can mitigate climate change via carbon capture and storage, afforestation, and international agreements, even though they are absolutely useless, international agreements, because they are not legally binding. We can adapt to climate change with things like seawalls for sea level rise and storms, genetically modified drought-resistant crops that we can grow without any water or very little water. Tropical storms have an eye and an eye wall, and after Typhoon Haiyan, we had looting and rioting, cholera spreading, etc., 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 which killed so many people. And one question that perhaps we haven't considered an awful lot is, we know all about modern day climate change. We can see the sea levels rising. We can see temperatures rising. We can see the fact that there's more tropical storms occurring. But how can we compare our climate now with what the climate was like, say, in the 1100s when this painting was painted, in the medieval period, or even before that, even in the last ice age? How do we know what those were? Pause the video and have a think. Well, there's a couple of ways. The main one is ice core analysis, where they can dig into ice cores in like Antarctica and the Arctic, and they can measure how much CO2 is inside them. Old paintings like this one give a brilliant example, but at one point the Thames was so cold it would freeze over entirely, which gives us this idea, I suppose, that it would have been a lot colder at one point. That was actually called the mini ice age, and that was because there was less sunspots on the sun. It caused the mini ice age, then followed by the medieval warming period when the sunspots returned. And we can also look at tree rings, where every year a tree grows, you get an extra ring. If there's a big thick band between the two rings, that's going to suggest good conditions for growth, hot, wet. And just to make sure we are all on the right ballpark here, at the equator, we have very, very, very low pressure. Low pressure equals high rainfall. And if you follow the cells around, the blue where the cool air is falling creates high pressure. High pressure creates low rainfall. On these arrows here, the UK sits underneath a low pressure belt. If it is low pressure, it is going to be high rainfall. So working out the poles, the climate at the poles, therefore, are going to be cold and arid. They're going to be very, very, very dry. They're under an extreme high pressure cell. What else is under a high pressure cell, I hear you ask? Oh, this lovely region, the Sahara Desert, the Sahel region, parts of the Western Desert USA. Huge areas of high pressure. The Kalahari Desert in South Africa. All going to be, but these ones are hot because they're close to the equator as opposed to the poles, quite far away. Okay, moving on to the last section, you'll be pleased to hear, is going on to tropical rainforests. Again, I'll state a question, you answer it in your head, written it down, pause the video, unpause the video. So first question, state the different adaptations. Pause, then unpause. So in A, we've got lianas, these roots or kind of vines that grow round a tree to get to sunlight at the top, to stop them from dying on the forest floor. We've got some drip tip leaves where the water is, the waxy surface allows the water to run off the leaf, it allows it to photosynthesize better, it stops the leaf from breaking. And we've also got everyone's favourite sloth, which has long claws to help it climb. It grows moss in its fur for camouflage to stop predators from finding it. All basic adaptations in the rainforest. These ones in particular, A is due to the fact that there's really low sunlight on the forest floor, and B because of the high rainfall. Talking about high rainfall, we've also got some different biomes. Now, a biome is a part of the world which has a similar climate, soil type, and biodiversity. And I always use the example that sometimes when you get on a plane, let's say you're flying from the UK here and you fly to Spain, you get off the plane and you go, oh, brilliant, I'm in Spain, the grass is different, the plants are different, it's hotter, it's so much better than the UK, X, Y, Z. And you have this assumption that when you go around the world, it's always going to be like that. But I remember distinctly getting off a plane in Tokyo in Japan, and I must have travelled for 18, 19 hours through all parts of the world. And I stepped off the plane, and the weather and climate was exactly the same as the UK, because our climate is based on our latitude. So these lines of latitude determine our climate alongside atmospheric circulation. It's also why we get rainforests on the equator, look, because hot all year round because of the equator, wet under that low pressure belt. So 3 biomes, A, B, C. Pause the video, name them, unpause. Okay, we've got A is a tundra, B is a hot desert, and C is the taiga, also known as the boreal forest, a twilight forest as well. Okay, 2 more questions, again a little bit harder now. What role do decomposers play in the ecosystem, and why is soil in the rainforest low in nutrients? Look at the diagrams, have a think, pause, unpause. Okay, so decomposers like fungi, microorganisms, their entire role is to break down organic matter to form soil and release nutrients. So if we're in a forest and a fox dies, a decomposer, as part of the nutrient cycle, will turn that dead fox back into nutrients and soil which plants can take up. It's an example of interdependence as well. And the soil in the rainforest is actually really low in nutrients for 2 reasons. Number one, because it rains all the time and there's so much surface runoff, there's going to be huge amounts of leaching, it's called, where water washes away nutrients. And also because there's so many plants in the rainforest, a huge uptake of biomass, so that it's never stored in the soil for very long in the rainforest. On that point, some more questions here. These are more to do with the 6 and 9 markers, but have a go, pause the video and unpause. Okay, so Deforestation, we've got commercial agriculture, we've got road building like the Trans-Amazonian Highway, we've got mineral extraction, a whole host of things. Positive impact of deforestation, well, economic development. All these things, even though they're bad for the rainforest, will all create multiplier effects for Brazil. Two negatives of deforestation, well, climate change, biodiversity loss, soil erosion. Local tribes will unfortunately have a loss of food and medicine and resources. And some solutions would include ecotourism, selective logging, and debt relief, where rich countries might forgive some debt if they don't destroy the rainforest in the hope that they will still get this economic development without having to destroy the forest. And then lastly, we move on to hot deserts, and a really tough two questions, probably the two hardest questions on this video, and you could get in the exam as well. But one example of interdependence in the hot desert, if you don't know what the word means, Google it. And why is nutrient transfer speed so slow in the hot desert? Think, pause, unpause. So, interdependence is basically where all the different elements of the ecosystem rely on each other. So, for example, there's an interdependence between organic matter dying and turning into soil. There's an interdependence between humans and some of the foods in the desert. There's an interdependence between the camel and the vegetation in the area. And nutrient transfer speed is really slow. There's loads in the soil because there's limited decomposers and there's also limited biomass as well. So there's not a huge amount in the soil there. And then finally, we finish off with a couple of questions. The first ones relate to our hot desert case study. The second one relate to the causes of desertification, human threat or physical threat to the fringes of hot deserts. And finally, a lovely management strategy for trying to solve this problem. Pause, quick fire the questions, unpause. So, Western Desert is found in the Western USA, for example, Nevada. It's made up of several different deserts, including the Mojave Desert. To be classed as a desert, you have to have less than 250 millimeters of rainfall per year. In the Western Desert, we have tourism in Las Vegas, mining, solar power opportunities, all of which create multiplier effects. We also have challenges for development. For example, extreme heat, inaccessibility, limitations of water. And a reminder that development or human well-being relates to health, wealth, education. And you can link all these things with those three categories. But what's also interesting to come up is outside of the hot desert, kind of on the fringe of hot deserts, we are having a problem called desertification, where normally fertile soil is turning into infertile desert, and it's all to do with soil erosion occurring. The human causes of that are deforestation, overgrazing of cattle, and that's all because of population increase. And the physical threats would be like climate change and drought, which dry the soil out, make the wind and rain easy to wash that soil away and wash it out. And then lastly, a management strategy for reducing human threats on desert fringes, well, magic stones and stone lines and afforestation. Now, well done if you've got the majority of those questions right. They are really tough. If you want to watch this video again and reattempt the quiz, maybe on mute, you don't have to listen to my voice, that's ideal. Any questions at all, please ask. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I will see you for another video on paper 2. Goodbye.